This 2-hour true crime Iceberg starts off disturbing and only gets worse with every case, with every level. So get yourself comfortable and get some snacks, because we're going in. The Morrison Campus Alternative School in Dallas, Oregon wasn't Carissa's first high school, but it was the first place that she ever felt truly safe. She enrolled there after a rocky stretch, where she was grieving the passing of her father, navigating addiction recovery, and trying to stabilize her life. Morrison was for kids who were slipping through the cracks, and that's exactly where Carissa had been. But the small classes, patient teachers, and the second chance mindset gave her the structure and support that she really needed. It became more than just a school, it became her second family. She kept in touch with her teachers long after graduation. They watched with pride as she went from barely passing to actually tutoring other students, as she traded chaotic relationships for a focused life plan, and as she started dreaming about something bold and selfless, as she now planned to become a teacher. Carissa was drawn to the kind of students that others overlooked. She knew exactly what it felt like to be judged, what it was like to lose a parent. She wanted to be the calm in the storm for someone else. After graduating from Morrison, Carissa wasted no time in building a better future. She enrolled at Chemiquita Community College, where she juggled coursework with part-time jobs. Her goal was a teaching degree from Western Oregon University. It was never easy, and money was definitely tight. She moved in between roommates, her mother's house, and even slept on couches when she had to. But everything changed in 2016, when she gave birth to her son, William Allen Fretwell II. She named him after her dad, and she called him Billy. At just 22, Carissa became a single mother, and she never looked back. She worked security shifts late into the night, sometimes grabbing only a few hours of sleep before her college classes started again the next morning. She took on swing shifts at a soy sauce factory in Salem. But as well as that, she volunteered at Morrison to fulfill her school practice hours, and this left her just enough time to study into the night whilst Billy slept. Every decision she made centered around her son. She chose to pay 6 months of rent up front to avoid housing instability, and she organized her life to make sure that Billy never felt the weight of her struggles. But the struggles were always there, they were just beneath the surface. Childcare alone ate up more than 30% of her income every single month. She had hoped that she'd be able to raise Billy entirely on her own, but by 2018 she knew that she needed help. She filed for support from Michael Wolf, Billy's biological father. Carissa didn't want a relationship with Wolf. In fact, she rarely even mentioned him by name. But she did want her son to have what he deserved. And even more than that, she wanted him to have the chance to know his father, if that father was willing to show up. However, the father fought at every turn. He disputed the support order. He told her to stop being dramatic. But still, Carissa bravely didn't back down. Billy had Carissa's blue eyes, as well as her fierce determination. He was bright, funny, and endlessly active. He loved Elmo, Jack from The Incredibles, and chasing soccer balls across the grassy patches near their apartment complex. Carissa's friends called him a blonde blur. He adored water, any kind, anywhere. Kiddie pools, puddles, the ocean, anything. He would light up on FaceTime calls with relatives. He gave tight, toddler-sized hugs, and wherever he went, he brought joy. Carissa posted online often about her son, photos of him at the coast, sat on her shoulders, holding her hand on an empty road. In one Facebook caption, she shared the words of a Creed song, "You come to me with arms wide open, you rest your head on my shoulder and hold me tight." Billy's bed was shaped like a race car. His toys, Sesame Street figurines and plastic trucks were scattered across their one-bedroom apartment. He and Carissa shared the bedroom closet. However, she gave him the master bedroom, meaning that he could sleep undisturbed, while she worked late into the night on homework. She often spoke with friends about just how exhausted she was, how the weight of parenting, school, and work was almost getting too much. However, one thing she never complained about was Billy. He was her reason for everything. Carissa's friends said that Billy kept her grounded, that he was the light that she clung to when the rest of life started feeling uncertain. Carissa met Michael Wolf the way many people meet regular customers. It was through routine, repetition, and proximity. She was delivering sandwiches for Jimmy John's in McMinnville, and Wolf was a frequent caller. But he didn't just order lunch. Instead, he specifically started asking for Carissa every single time. At first, it might have felt flattering, or well, maybe not. He was an older man. In fact, he was older by more than 2 decades, and he worked in security at Cascade Steel Rolling Mills. He actually helped get Carissa a part-time job there, and that's why she was working security shifts just like his. It's unclear exactly where their relationship turned personal. Carissa kept it pretty private. Unlike other romances that she posted freely about online, she never mentioned Wolf by name. In a private Facebook group for moms, she later shared that she found out that he was in fact married only days after learning that she was pregnant. She ended things with Wolf immediately. She didn't want to be responsible for breaking up his marriage, but by then it was already too late. Billy was on the way. When she told Wolf that she was expecting, he didn't react like her father-to-be. According to friends, he instead offered to pay for an abortion, but Carissa declined. She prepared for life as a single mother, leaning on friends, teachers, and community resources. And Wolf, for his part, sent occasional gifts, but he never spent any real time with Billy. He never contributed financially. He never took on a father's role. But what he did do, though, was linger in Carissa's life. She told friends that Wolf would show up unannounced at her apartment, and that he did in fact have a key, because he once co-signed a lease for that property. Carissa also suspected that Wolf had hired someone to follow her. She thought maybe he was trying to gather evidence to challenge her parenting. She said that he was controlling, that he made her feel uncomfortable, but she never really went too far into detail. Even her closest friends struggled to understand the dynamic of the relationship. It was hard to tell if he had been a secret boyfriend, an occasional hookup, or something else entirely. But one thing was clear, Carissa just didn't trust him, and she did fear what he might try to do next. Carissa had previously done everything she could to avoid involving Wolf in Billy's life, but by 2018 she felt out of options. The cost of raising a child alone, whilst also attending college and working full-time, it all added up to a crushing weight. And while she hesitated at first, she eventually filed a claim in Polk County Circuit Court, requesting child support. Wolf contested it. Firstly, he demanded a DNA test to disprove the claims. However, that backfired, and he was in fact confirmed to be Billy's father. So he then argued that the calculations were unfair, even though the court documents showed his gross monthly income was actually close to $3,800. All of this meant that the legal process dragged out for months. Carissa told her friends that Wolf was sending her creepy messages during that time. That Christmas, he mailed her a package full of toys for Billy, along with a separate box for Carissa. Inside it was lingerie, sweatpants with Juicy printed across the back, and a laminated card promising an intimate favour. Carissa wasn't endeared though, she was disgusted. She wanted him to stop sending gifts or she'd have to tell his wife. He just brushed off these threats though. He told her she was being dramatic, but then came the court order. In April of 2019, a judge ruled that Wolf must pay $904 a month, but just 3 days after the final paperwork was signed, rather than making life better for Carissa and Billy, things got unimaginably worse. May the 13th, 2019 began like any other Monday. Carissa picked Billy up from his babysitter at around 4 p.m, and then they likely went home to their West Salem apartment, with Billy's race car bed, his Sesame Street toys, and the small shared space that was their sanctuary. But that night, something unthinkable happened. At 8:45 p.m, security cameras captured Michael Wolf leaving his post at the steel mill. He got into a golf cart, drove through a tree line, and then disappeared into the night. By 9 p.m. though, his phone was pinging near Carissa's neighborhood. Carissa never arrived for her overnight shift at the soy sauce factory. Additionally, she never contacted anyone, and from that moment forward, neither she nor Billy was ever seen again. By 2:45 a.m., Wolf was back at Cascade Steel, caught on camera carrying a white trash bag. This was instead of his usual backpack. His mobile phone records showed that he returned to his home in Gaston by 4:30 a.m. The very next day, Carissa's phone sent a strange text from near Wolf's property. Police refused to release the details of that message, nor will they share who it was sent to, but from then on, Carissa's trail fell silent. On May the 17th, a concerned relative went to Carissa's apartment, and she found the front door was unlocked. The television was still playing, her glasses, wallet, and both cars were still there. Nothing made sense. Salem police opened a missing persons case, one that would quickly turn into a full-blown manhunt.
Now, a week and a half since they went missing, her friends feared that the father of Fretwell's child had something to do with it.
I know they had some problems because he was married, and she was a little scared of him because after she got pregnant, he did threaten her at one time.
There was a yelling, screaming. We heard the child crying. We heard saying, "Get away."
She says her husband and other neighbors called police.
Did you hear anything specific about what was being said?
Just said, "Get out, get out." That's all I heard. But we could hear a kid crying. So to us, that's, thing to call on. I would say it was violent, screaming.
And you heard a man's voice?
Mm-hmm.
And multiple neighbors recall hearing several arguments between Fretwell and a man, including one fight a couple of months ago where police were called.
Wolf was questioned and he denied any involvement. He said that he hadn't seen Carissa since a child support hearing in April. And he said that he hadn't been to Salem in over a year. But as we know, the cell data and surveillance told another story.
At a vigil Monday night, friends, community members, even strangers came together for a mom and son who've become near and dear to them.
I am hopeful, very much.
Mikkel Moats organized the gathering. She says it's not a memorial for Carissa and Billy. It's the opposite, a show of support for their safe return.
We're trying to remind people that we're still out here looking, we're still hopeful, we're still looking for answers, and that it's just important that anybody that has any information to come forward, no matter how small or big that it may seem.
Investigators traced Wolf's movements, they gathered search warrants, and listed him as a person of interest. A week after the disappearance, he was arrested outside a donut shop in Portland. Witnesses said that he made strange comments to female employees.
I would never guessed. I met him a couple weeks ago. He was quiet, nice. There wasn't anything odd. It was just a neighbor saying hi and has a dog.
I don't know. It's just odd. It's just, you see it on the news all the time of somewhere else or a different place, and then next thing you know, it's just right next door. So it kind of makes you wonder.
Following a search warrant, police said that they found substances on his property that were capable of sedating a human being. They also found rope and tarps, items that were purchased just after Carissa and Billy vanished, and at that time they still both remained missing. And then on the morning of June the 15th, searchers returned to a wooded area near Yamhill Timberland where Wolf had firewood permits and which was close to his fishing spot. And this time they found something. Roughly 800 feet from a previously searched zone, 2 bodies were discovered beneath unnatural debris. They were wrapped in tarps, together. It was Carissa and Billy. Carissa's time on its earth was ended by a single blast to the head, and Billy's cause remains undetermined, but this confirmed that neither one of them would ever be coming home. The years that followed were filled with grief, anger, and endless courtroom delays. Carissa's family, once silenced to protect the case, could now finally begin speaking out. Her mother, Nyla, wore a shirt with both of their faces on it. It read, "Gone but not forgotten," as she stood before Wolf in court. She loved that little boy so much, she said. The courtroom was packed with investigators, prosecutors, and family members who'd waited for over 3 years for this day. The legal journey had been exhausting, dragged out by appeals, new laws, and technicalities. For Carissa's sister Katrina, the sentence didn't bring her any peace. She read her victim impact statement through tears, her voice trembling as she told Wolf, "You put a dollar amount on 2 lives." She shared how her own young son, when asked in class what he wished for, he didn't wish for toys or games, he just wanted his aunt and cousin back. Wolf sat in a suit, almost entirely obscured behind his attorneys. He didn't speak, nor did he apologize. He just blinked and looked shaken as his sentence was read. He received life in prison, with no parole for 30 years. By that time, he'll be in his 80s. Wolf's defense had fought over whether the death penalty could be applied, but in the end, his guilty plea took that option off the table. As Wolf was led out of court, he paused briefly at a collage of Carissa and Billy. He looked at their photos, the woman that he had seemingly groomed, the son that he had never raised, and then he walked on. The downstairs neighbour heard it before he knew what it was. A loud boom, and then another, then 3 more in quick succession. It was like furniture being hurled or something heavier. And then there was silence, followed by loud music. That's when the neighbour heard Kane Tailby screaming, "Don't do this. Wake up. Wake up." The neighbour had been on the verge of calling for help, but now, heart pounding in his chest, he stepped outside with his phone in his hand. But he didn't need to dial. An ambulance was already turning onto Green Hill Lane. Chrissy Everett Hickson was only 21. She was vibrant, funny, open-hearted. The kind of young woman whose laugh made others laugh, whose energy was pretty magnetic. Her mother Dawn called her innocent, truly beautiful, compassionate, compelling. She also had 3 sisters who adored her, a father who called her his little miracle, as she was born despite doctors saying that he would never be able to have children after he was in a serious road accident. Chrissy was the youngest of all the siblings. She was the soft-hearted one, and she didn't go looking for trouble at all. In fact, she saw the best in people, and sometimes even when it wasn't really deserved. Chrissy worked as a baker, but she was just beginning to dream big. Her family said that she wanted to travel, that she wanted to start her own business one day, and maybe have kids. She had signed up to the organ donor registry without ever mentioning it to anyone. This was the kind of compassion that she was known for, but no act of kindness could protect her from what would happen that night, especially not in the one place that she should have felt safe. On February the 17th, 2024, Chrissy and her boyfriend, 31-year-old Kane Tailby, were planning to celebrate 1 year together. It was nothing fancy, just a trip into Derby, where they would see a film and have a couple of drinks. But Kane was already in a bad mood. This was something which he blamed on a cat. "One of them is a bit temperamental with me," he said. "She went through one of the hate phases and it aggravated me." And to make the evening unravel even further, the couple boarded the wrong bus, a bus that didn't actually go to Derby. This made Kane more irritated. So instead of going to the cinema, the couple picked up a few cans of beer and then headed back towards Riddings. They stopped at a pub along the way and had a couple of drinks, and then they walked the rest of the way home. It was pretty late when they got back to their flat on Green Hill Lane, and within an hour, they started shouting. Their neighbour heard it all. In fact, it was loud enough that he felt he had to pause the TV. The man who lived below Chrissy and Kane had grown used to the sounds of young people living upstairs. There was laughter, footsteps, and sometimes music too. But that night, something felt wrong. The raised voices started shortly after midnight, and then the muffled shouting escalated into something sharper, and this was followed suddenly by 5 or 6 hard thudding noises. They weren't the kind of bangs that came from dropping something. These were deliberate, repetitive, and almost measured. The neighbour stepped out of his flat, concerned, and he hovered in the stairwell. Then he heard something which made him grow even more suspicious. Music started playing, and it was very loud. He thought it was as if someone was trying to cover up the silence. Then came a noise from a nightmare. It was a gurgling, followed by a man shouting, "Wake up, wake up." Don't do this to me. The neighbour sent a text message to a friend saying, "I'm seriously concerned." He was about to call emergency services, but he wouldn't get the chance. The approaching flashing blue lights beat him to it. An ambulance had already been dispatched, and that's because Kane Tailby had already picked up the phone. But when Kane's call connected, this story would only get worse. In the 999 call, Kane's tone wavered between panic and control. He said that Chrissy was in the bath and that red was leaking from her ear. He said he'd been trying to clean her up. But the story he gave, the one he clung to, was that this was all Chrissy's fault.
Literally just, oh, she got pushy shovey, you start pushing shoving me around, I've retaliated, and obviously I'm a bit bigger than what she is, and it's just kind of escalated from there.
When police arrived, they found Chrissy unconscious in a bath. She was now completely unresponsive. The water she was found in was now a translucent crimson. She was rushed to the nearest hospital. Doctors could immediately tell that this was no accident. There were skull fractures, bruising was found on the neck, and there was a traumatic brain injury so severe that her brain had begun to swell, pushing against the confines of her skull. The prognosis was grim from the start. Chrissy was placed on life support, and although her body did hold on, she never regained consciousness. 5 days later, on February the 23rd, at 12:39 a.m, her time on this earth came to an end.
Need hand up here, alright?
He's just pulled me a bit.
Yep. Yep. You're alright, mate, yeah?
The only thing that passes is you took my laces.
From the moment that Kane Tailby was taken into custody, the truth was slippery. At first he told police that Chrissy had slapped him. "How did that make you feel?" one officer asked. "Angry," he said. Really angry. He claimed that he shouted at her, pinning her to the floor, and that he banged her head once. When police mentioned the neighbour had heard 5 or 6 loud bangs, his story shifted. He now admitted that he may have slammed her head 5 or 6 times. He also now described using both hands to push on her neck, lifting her head off the floor, and then slamming it back down with force. He said he remembered the noise that it made, and he saw that her eyes were closed. He said he heard her groan, and then saw the red beginning to leak. However, he kept going. When asked why, he simply couldn't explain it. Instead, he pointed again to the cat, to the bus that went the wrong way, to the beers that they had drank, in fact, to everything but himself. Despite repeated interviews, one thing never reared its head, and that was a motive. There wasn't even really an attempt at one. All we got were flashes of temper, combined with irreversible consequences. The trial at Derby Crown Court unfolded across a week and a half. The prosecution, led by Mary Pryor Casey, laid out the timeline with painful clarity. They played the 999 call. They showed images of the scene. They detailed Chrissy's injuries, the multiple skull fractures, the extensive bruising, the fact that her brain had continued to swell after the event, eventually pushing through the base of her skull, a final fact that could not be reversed. No one in her family knew that Chrissy was a registered organ donor. That was not until doctors asked the question that they never wanted to hear. And even in their grief, they knew what Chrissy would have said. And in fact, 5 people are alive today because of her choice. 5 strangers now carry pieces of Chrissy. Her mother, Dawn, later said that this knowledge did give her the smallest measure of comfort, that even now, her daughter's heart had been guided by compassion. Chrissy didn't get to live out her dreams, but she did give others the chance to live out theirs. Back in court, Kane had admitted to manslaughter, but he insisted that he never meant to cause serious harm. He tried to frame all of this simply as an overreaction in the heat of the moment, but the evidence told another story: the sustained nature of the blows, the attempt to clean her up rather than immediately getting her help that could have saved her life, the neighbour's account of multiple deliberate impacts, and of course, the bath. Why put her in the bath if it wasn't just to try and hide what had happened? "Whatever the reason for your rage that night," said Judge Sean Smith Casey, There was no justification for the violence you used, and the jury agreed. On March the 26th, 2025, Kane Tailby was found guilty of murder. 2 days after the verdict, the sentencing hearing began. The courtroom was silent as Chrissy's family now addressed the man who had taken Chrissy from them. Her big sisters, Abby, Kaylee, and Jenny spoke first. Words cannot begin to convey our devastating loss, they said. 4 sisters are now 3. Father Sean called Chrissy his little miracle, and that she was. He looked at Kane and said, "I've always been Mr. Fix-It to her, but I couldn't fix this." Then her mother, Dawn, stood to speak. She did something that few expected. Dawn forgave him. "I wish you well," she said softly. "You will need those well wishes to comfort your soul." Her strength stunned the room. Even the judge called her compassion beyond admirable. But he didn't mistake forgiveness for leniency. This was an explosion of anger and violence, Judge Smith told Kane. "You snuffed out the life of someone who trusted you. Why? Only you know. But the devastation you've caused is immeasurable." Kane Tailby stood in the dock as his sentence was read. Life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 16 years and 329 days before he could even be considered for release. He showed no visible reaction. His solicitor argued that he was not an evil man, a man with no prior convictions. He was a long-term bakery worker. He was a father, but none of that mattered more than what he had done. Chrissy Everett Hickson had her whole life ahead of her. She had love, dreams, family. She had people who described her smile as infectious and her spirit as kind and considerate. She passed in terrible circumstances, in the home that she shared with the man that she loved, and on the night that they were meant to be celebrating their relationship. And while Kane may one day leave prison, Chrissy's loved ones will carry a life sentence of grief. This is the true story of Molly McLaren, a much-loved and driven young woman, someone that was building the brightest of futures, having already overcome so much. So when a whirlwind Tinder romance fell apart, why did Molly feel like she was being watched in her every move? And what would become of Molly? Molly McLaren was a 23-year-old student at the University of Kent. Surrounded by friends and family, Molly had a support system that was setting her up for the brightest of futures. She was making amazing grades and gaining significant popularity on social media. All of this was working towards securing her career as a personal trainer and fitness influencer. Although she had struggled as a teenager with an eating disorder and anxiety issues, she had worked hard to overcome them and prioritize her own health, both mentally and physically. Molly desired to be an encouraging influence in the lives of anyone going through what she had once endured. She wanted to reach the lives of people that felt exactly the way that she did, educating them, bringing awareness and providing resources for those struggling with eating disorders. Her friends and family described Molly as a ball of positivity, fun, and kindness, spreading an infectious light to everyone she came into contact with. This case takes place in Kent, a popular tourist destination and one of the top 10 wealthiest counties in the UK. Because of its beautiful fields and orchards, Kent is lovingly referred to as the Garden of England. As a student, Molly was active on Tinder, probably the most well-known dating application. Popular among mainly single people, it's a fast and easy way to meet new people. Molly had used the app numerous times before, but had never yielded a relationship that lasted longer than 6 months. In July of 2016, this trend in Molly's dating life would change. She was swiping left and right on Tinder, until that is, she came across a man named Joshua Stimpson, a 25-year-old warehouse worker with striking eyes. They began talking immediately, quickly getting into the intimate details of their own lives. Joshua had shared his own struggles with mental health throughout his life, revealing to Molly that he had bipolar disorder. Molly was able to resonate with Joshua's struggles. She detailed her own issues with anxiety and disordered eating. Molly saw the pain that Joshua had gone through, feeling the pull to support him through his anxieties. After all, her calling in life was to help people who struggled like she did, and the attraction between the two was too difficult to ignore. Molly told Joshua to pretend that they'd been talking for longer than just a few days. She felt like she had known him for a lifetime. After spending months talking non-stop, they finally had their first date in November of that year. By that point, they were already so infatuated with each other that meeting face-to-face made their passion for each other ignite into flames. Molly introduced Joshua to her parents, and her mother was a little apprehensive towards him. The fact that he had bipolar disorder scared her. She didn't want her daughter to be brought back into the dark place that she once was. Nevertheless, she supported Molly in her decisions, knowing that she was an adult who was capable of a mature relationship. The two couldn't go more than a couple of days without seeing each other. That is, until the honeymoon phase of their relationship came to an end. It was time, at least in part, to go back to reality, and Molly wanted to live her life with Joshua as an important part of it. Unfortunately, Joshua didn't have the same vision of their budding romance. As the weeks went on, Joshua became increasingly more controlling, always wanting to know where Molly was, where she was going, and what she was doing. He was now obsessed. He would ask to come over and see her every single day. He even quit his job at the warehouse to spend as much time as he could around his beloved. Even when Molly was busy with homework and told Joshua that she couldn't see him, he would come over anyway, leaving Molly frustrated with where their relationship was headed. She had finally escaped the control that her mental health and eating disorder had over her life, all to be controlled once again, but this time by a man. On the other hand, Molly knew that Joshua's mental state was fragile. She couldn't bring herself to end things with him despite the turbulence that she was feeling inside. By April of 2017, the relationship had taken a huge downturn. Molly had found out that Joshua was taking photos and videos of her without her knowledge. This left her feeling violated and completely out of control of her own body. She didn't know what to do anymore. She asked her mum for advice. Her mother later recalled the situation, saying that Joshua remained cool as a cucumber during the whole ordeal. He felt no remorse for taking these photos and videos, and he didn't even believe that he did anything wrong in the first place. By June of 2017, Molly was exhausted. She couldn't take any more of the countless arguments, lack of trust and insecurities on the part of Joshua. This was supposed to be a relationship, and it was turning more into a prison sentence. She finally broke the news at a belated birthday celebration. She told Joshua that they could no longer be together. He didn't take it well at all. He cried and screamed, turning the heads of Molly's friends in the middle of a birthday party. Despite the messiness of it all, Molly was relieved to be rid of the man that was watching her every move. But unfortunately and predictably, it didn't stop there. It was only a matter of time before the photos and videos that Joshua had taken of Molly were weaponized against her. He took to social media to post the content that he had taken of her, labeling her as an illicit substance user and as an all-round awful person. It was devastating that it had come to this, but with the support of her family, Molly knew what she had to do. She gathered all the posts that Joshua had made about her and brought them to the Kent police. The tactic and response of the Kent police was to scare Joshua into leaving Molly alone. They called him on speaker and attempted to intimidate him, asking, "We wouldn't want Molly to come to the police station again about you, would we?" The alarming response they heard from Joshua through the loudspeaker was, "Wouldn't we?" Joshua aggressively asserted that he had done nothing wrong, saying that if what he was doing was wrong, they could be assured that there was more to come. Fortunately, the police called later and told Molly and her family that Joshua had agreed to take the posts down. He was afraid about what the bosses at his new job would think about his social media slander campaign. Molly felt that she could relax, hoping that the nightmare was finally over. Trying to get back into her regular routine, she visited the Ship and Trades pub with some friends. It was a night to celebrate her enrollment into a personal training course. But to Molly and her friend's surprise, a familiar face walked through the door with a girl on his arm, none other than Joshua Stimpson. He had walked by Molly and her girlfriends with his new date, with Molly rolling her eyes and calling him a creep. The group pondered how Joshua would even know that they were at a pub in the first place, but they quickly realised that they had posted about it on social media just hours before. Was Joshua stalking Molly? Molly's friends recalled seeing him walk by without his date, and seeing him standing in the smoking area to watch them. But Joshua didn't even smoke. The group was able to leave safely and without issue, and Molly shook off the otherwise unsettling situation. Sometimes breakups are just messy and people can be immature. On the morning of June the 29th, Molly continued to try and return to her normal single life. She arrived at her local gym at 10 a.m, ready to begin her day with a workout. It wasn't long before Joshua was caught on CCTV footage following her into the facility, walking to work out next to her in the otherwise empty room. Molly immediately texted her mother, letting her know that Joshua had shown up to the gym, and that she was there alone with him. Molly's mother responded by calling her in urgency, telling her to leave the gym without looking back. As Molly packed her stuff and briskly walked to her car, she sent a text to her friends relaying this same information, complaining about how she felt she always now had to look over her shoulder. But this would sadly be the last text that Molly would send. The Kent police arrived at the plaza where the gym was situated, and what they found was like a scene from a horror movie. Numerous bystanders had witnessed a vicious attack on Molly, her driver's side door being ripped open, and her body being inflicted with 75 wounds made by a sharp implement. Benjamin Morton was the man that had called the police, valiantly attempting to stop the attacker and block him from leaving the scene. He had slammed the attacker's leg in the car door, and he attempted to pull him away from Molly. But the assailant's fit of rage would not be interrupted. When the police surveyed the scene, the attacker strangely approached them almost immediately. Wiping the red spatter from his face, he calmly looked at the officers and said, "You want me." To the officers' horror, the assailant was a subject of their phone call earlier that month. It was, of course, Joshua Stimpson. Hero Morton had tried to revive Molly from the gruesome attack, but it was without success. Molly's life was pronounced to have officially ended at 11:43 a.m, the cause of which being trauma to the neck. The arrest and interrogation of Joshua required little effort on the part of the police. Joshua had admitted to the acts that he had committed, saying that although he ended Molly's life, it was not premeditated. According to Joshua, he had been so overtaken with rejection that he had to end his pain in the only way that he knew how, by taking revenge and taking Molly's life. Joshua would stand firm on his statement as his trial began in early 2018. His defense team asserted that Joshua couldn't control the pain of Molly's rejection. This was due to his mental health issues. They claimed that Joshua had been heavily affected by the divorce of his parents and the subsequent abandonment by his mother. He frequently visited mental health clinics throughout his life, attempting to deal with his extreme hypersensitivity to rejection, and according to the defense, a personality disorder. For these reasons, Joshua didn't have the mental capabilities to premeditate his attack on Molly. His acts were outside any type of normal cognitive function. But for the prosecution, this couldn't be further from the truth. If Joshua's attack wasn't premeditated, then he wouldn't have been been seen on CCTV purchasing a sharp implement just days before. This same implement would be used to take Molly's life. Further than this, if Joshua was so overtaken with the pain of rejection, why did he wait weeks to commit this awful deed? Nothing about this assault seemed to result from a lack of control, nor did it seem purely impulsive. However, the defense's assertion about Josh's mental state was still an important thing to consider. Because of this, the prosecution welcomed a psychiatrist who evaluated Joshua to testify to his condition. But according to him, there was no evidence of Joshua having a personality disorder or any mental defect. Instead of that, the psychiatrist did suggest that Joshua had traits of narcissism, having absolutely no remorse for the crimes that he had committed. By the time the closing arguments rolled around, it was unclear which side had the advantage. Molly's mother and family members must have been struck with anxiety. After only 3 hours of deliberation, the jury had made their choice. Molly's family and friends breathed a sigh of relief. The jury declared that Joshua Stimpson was guilty of a premeditated, vicious attack on their beloved girl. At his sentencing, Judge Adele Williams had some choice words to say as she committed him to a minimum of 26 years in prison for his crimes. She detailed how Stimpson was a highly dangerous man, believing that women would be in danger if he were free to walk the streets. She hoped that he would never be released for the things that he had done to Molly, to her family, and to her future. Molly's family released an official statement thanking the bystanders of the assault for their brave efforts in saving Molly's life. Regarding the proceedings, they said, "The verdict has brought us a small measure of comfort, but it seems that nothing will take away the pain, or allow us to come to terms with our Molly being taken away from us. We are serving a lifetime of pain, anguish, and loss. A light has gone out in all of our hearts, but shines bright as a star forever glowing." Following the trial, the Molly McLaren Foundation was launched by Molly's family. This is an organisation that would continue the dreams that Molly had for her life that ended too soon. The foundation holds a huge event every year full of games, food and fun, raising money for and bringing awareness towards charities that seek to reach people who struggle with eating disorders. Since its establishment, they've raised over £30,000, all in support of Molly's goals for positivity, confidence and change, turning the most horrifying events into a beacon of light for the world. For 6 years, Anthony Goodwin and Harry Messenger lived just a few steps apart in the small cul-de-sac of Crispin Close in Faversham, UK. Their friendship, at least on the surface, seemed easy. Neighbours would often see them laughing together, sharing drinks, or cooking meals in each other's homes. The two men were in their 60s and 70s. Both of them had once lived rougher lives, but those days now seemed long past. Harry had a serious criminal record tied to substance trafficking, and Anthony had a long string of offences from his younger days, and these included violent offences, but he hadn't done anything like that in more than 40 years. Their bond was built on familiarity, long conversations, and of course a shared fondness for alcohol. But this friendship wasn't as simple as it looked. Neighbours also recalled heated arguments between the two men. One neighbour even remembered seeing Anthony behaving aggressively, and he was aiming this towards Harry just weeks before the events in this video. Both of the men were known to drink heavily, and when the drinks started flowing too freely, tensions sometimes started to build. On May the 18th, 2023, those tensions would explode into something that could never be undone. That night, Anthony spent several hours drinking at the Brent's Tavern, before then heading over to Harry's bungalow. Harry, for his part, was also already well into the night of drinking. By later testing, he was found to have consumed the equivalent of 2 bottles of red wine plus vodka chasers, and he'd also taken tramadol. Neither of the men were in a state to handle a disagreement. At first, it was just words. It was a drunken argument, sparked by something that Harry said about an airplane. Anthony later described it as something silly. Yet somehow, in their intoxicated state, it escalated with shocking speed. According to Anthony's own version of events, Harry suddenly became agitated. He then claimed that Harry, normally calm, charged at him like a bull and began striking him with his fists. Moments later, Harry allegedly produced a hammer, a tool that he kept in a drawer in his kitchen. Anthony said he wrestled it away, and, now in fear for his life, he struck Harry back. At just after 3:30 a.m., neighbours said that they heard 3 heavy bangs echoing from Harry's bungalow, and then there was silence. What Anthony did next, instead of calling for help, was he left Harry laying on the floor. He then returned to his own home across the cul-de-sac. There he washed his clothes, and he got changed into clean ones. And then as dawn broke, he casually walked back to Harry's home. He started ringing the doorbell, and he was trying to call Harry on his mobile phone, acting as if nothing had really happened. However, witnesses described his behaviour that morning as strange, saying it was almost performative. What Anthony didn't realise at the time is that he was actually leaving a trail, and it would answer some tough questions for detectives. At 4:11 a.m, just 40 minutes after neighbours heard those heavy thuds, Anthony sent a chilling text to his brother. It said, "No, I just murdered someone." Still though, at this time, with Anthony believing what he believed, he made no attempt to call emergency services. It is possible that Harry could have been saved if he had. Instead though, he waited. He just wandered back and forth between his bungalow and Harry's, and he continued to make half-hearted attempts to contact him. In fact, it wasn't until nearly 12 hours later, on the afternoon of May the 19th, that Anthony finally dialed 999. The call was recorded, and it painted a disturbing picture. Anthony spoke slowly, he was almost nonchalant, and this is part of that call.
Can police close your emergency? Good afternoon. My name is Anthony, and I was over my friend's house last night, a neighbour of mine, and we got into a bit of a dispute. I'm trying to ring him, and I'm getting no answer. We did have a bit of a quarrel over there, you know.
So what is your concern? What have you called the emergency line for?
Yeah, I think I'm on arguing with ran up.
Oh, so are you calling to report the fight?
No, I'm not. He's not responding. So I could have hurt him, you know.
Okay, what's his name?
Harry Messenger.
He admitted to hitting Harry in the head with a hammer. However, he still insisted that it was done in self-defense. Throughout the call, you may have realized that he minimized the severity of what had happened. There was no urgency in his voice. There was no sense of panic, and there was no sense of fear. By the time paramedics and police finally arrived, Harry Messenger had been gone for many hours. The hammer, still stained with red, was found lying beside his lifeless body. And Anthony's story, a story of a desperate struggle for survival, would soon be put under the microscope. From the moment that investigators entered Harry's home, the scene told a story far different from Anthony's claims. The hammer that lay beside him was soaked in DNA and covered in tissue. There were no signs of a major struggle anywhere else in the house. There was no smashed furniture, no broken glasses, no overturned tables. In fact, nothing that would normally suggest a wild brawl. Instead, the scene looked quite clinical. It was targeted and deliberate. Harry's injuries were devastating. The forensic pathologist catalogued no fewer than 18 blunt force injuries located on Harry's head, face and neck. In fact, his skull had caved inward in multiple places. It said his face was fractured beyond recognition. His ear had nearly been torn from his head. And on top of all this, the claw end of the hammer had been used to deliver 13 blows to Harry's chest. The tightly packed markings showed a focused rage rather than a panicked defense. Anthony, by contrast, showed only minor facial bruises and scratches. He had no broken bones. There was no internal injuries, no wounds consistent with being repeatedly attacked with a hammer. Detective Inspector Ivan Beasley, the man who led the investigation, later said the multiple wounds found on the victim, including the fatal wound to his head, inflicted by such a weapon as a hammer, proved that Anthony Goodwin intended to kill Harry Messenger. combined with Anthony's behaviour after the attack, the washing of his clothes, the text he sent to his brother, and the delay in calling 999, all of this evidence painted a devastating portrait. This was simply murder, and soon, a jury would be asked to weigh Goodwin's story against the grim and undeniable facts. Anthony Goodwin's trial began at Maidstone's Crown Court later that year. From the beginning, his defence was clear. He still insisted that he had acted only to protect himself. He described Harry as flying into a sudden rage, claiming that he had been attacked without warning, that he'd been punched and then threatened with a hammer. The judge, Jeremy Carey, rejected Anthony's version of events outright. "I am satisfied you could have left his home at any point, even when he had the hammer in his hand," the judge told him. Continuing, "You stayed because you were angry with him." Evidence from a neighbour, Shannon Gibson, further undermined Goodwin's case. She described seeing him act aggressively towards Harry just 2 weeks before the event. Both of the men, it seemed, were known to drink heavily, and sometimes they would clash when intoxicated. The jury deliberated for over 6.5 hours, and when they returned, their verdict was clear. Anthony Goodwin was guilty of murder. He showed little visible reaction as the decision was read out. This man, who had once shared drinks and laughter with Harry Messenger, would now share a prison cell with a stranger instead. And this friendship that had begun so easily somehow managed to end in the worst way imaginable. On sentencing day, Judge Carey addressed Anthony Goodwin directly. He described the attack as one carried out with great brutality, and said that it was fueled by alcohol. He acknowledged that both men did have criminal pasts, but he also emphasised that neither man had committed any violent offences for several decades. That night, the judge said that the two men had simply lost their tempers, and that it was over something relatively trivial. But what mattered now was the irreversible outcome. Harry Messenger, a father and grandfather, a man deeply loved by his family, was gone, and Anthony Goodwin would live with the consequences for the rest of his life. The judge imposed a life sentence, with a minimum term of 13 years, before the man could even apply for parole. Goodwin remained mostly silent as he was led away. Outside the courtroom, Detective Inspector Ivan Beasley offered words of comfort to Harry's grieving family. "I hope this verdict is of some comfort to the victim's family and friends." For the other residents of Crispin Close, the sense of safety and familiarity they once knew had now been forever shattered. One argument, one moment of uncontrolled rage, had destroyed not just a life, but an entire family and a community's peace. The small white hatchback lay crumpled against a lamppost. Its roof was crushed and its wheels still spinning in the air. Police body cam footage captures a sobbing woman slumped in the back of a patrol car. Her voice, trembling and panicked, breaks the grim silence. "Who's dead? Please tell me who's dead." Long before the night that Truman Hubb lost his life, Carla Dodds had already survived a tragedy behind the wheel. As a teenager, she'd been a passenger in a fatal crash, one that should have been a wake-up call. After witnessing firsthand how quickly life can just be snatched away, how the reckless choices of others can shatter families, this should have left a lasting impression, but it didn't. Friends and family had hoped that the earlier accident would be enough to change her mindset. Instead, it seemed to fade into the background of Carla's fast-moving social life. The lessons that she could have learned about the value of caution, about responsibility, and just how precious life is, all of them were ignored. By 2022, Carla was a 25-year-old barmaid living in Whitley Bay. Popular, lively, and known for her infectious energy, she loved nights out, live music, and big groups of friends. She was the life of the party, but sometimes, and often, the life of the party teeters on the edge of disaster. As one former friend would later say, she always thought she could handle it, no matter what she drank, no matter how reckless the situation seemed. She thought she was invincible. When Carla climbed into her Hyundai i10 on that cold November night, She had already crossed several invisible lines. She just didn't know that this time there would be no coming back. That night had started innocently enough. Carla finished her shift at a bar in Whitley Bay, where she'd been pulling pints and laughing with regulars. But when her shift ended, the real party began. She headed to a local nightclub where the drinks kept on flowing. Carla would later claim that she only had 2 glasses of wine and 2 tequila shots that night. But witnesses remembered things very differently. They described her as lively, flushed, loud, and unmistakably intoxicated. Sometime after midnight, a plan was made. There was another party happening and it was just a short drive away, and Carla, full of bravado, offered to drive. Friends piled into the car, and it wasn't just reckless, it was dangerous from the start. As the vehicle wasn't meant to carry 6 passengers, one person squeezed into the boot, and 4 others crammed across the back seat, knees pressed against the windows. Still, the mood inside the car was electric. Music blasted, people sang at the top of their lungs, and Truman Hubb, just 22 years old, was laughing along with the others. At one point, he leaned his head out of the rear window, feeling the cold night air whip against his face. No one inside that packed car seemed to realize just how close they were to disaster, at least not yet. The Hyundai sped through the dark streets of North Tyneside. It was weaving between lanes. Carla pressed harder on the accelerator. She was laughing along with singing and barely glancing at the road. In the front seat, a friend shouted over the noise, "Slow down," but Carla didn't. Behind the wheel, her judgment was clouded. She was impaired, distracted, and trying to keep up with the chaotic energy around her. The heavy weight of too many passengers shifted the car's balance, and this made every sudden movement even riskier. The road that they were on, the A191, wasn't particularly challenging, but at high speeds, even the smallest mistake could be fatal. Up ahead, a slight bend approached, and Carla didn't react in time. The car clipped the curb, and then, almost in slow motion, it veered into a lamppost. The impact was devastating. The tiny car flipped onto its side, with metal screeching and glass shattering. Inside, screams filled the air, then were cut short. Truman Hubb, the young man who had been smiling just moments earlier, suffered catastrophic injuries. Within just seconds, the laughter and singing had been replaced by sirens, gasps, and a stunned silence. But even as her friends lay trapped and broken, Carla made a choice that would define the rest of her life. She ran. When emergency services arrived at the A191, they found a scene that was almost too chaotic to process. The small white car was mangled beyond recognition. Debris was scattered across the road, illuminated by flashing blue lights. Inside the wreck, Truman was discovered amongst the crumpled seats. Despite desperate attempts to save him, his injuries were far too severe. He was pronounced at the scene. And to add to the tragedy, Truman hadn't even made it to the new chapter that he'd been so close to starting. Recently diagnosed with autism and ADHD, he'd been weeks away from receiving medication that promised him a clearer, easier path forward. His family had been excited and hopeful, but that night ended all of those dreams. Rosalind Hubb, Truman's mother, would later describe that moment as the beginning of the most horrific journey of her life. A journey filled with endless grief, sleepless nights, and a silence where Truman's laughter once lived. "Life is unbearable," she said in her victim impact statement. "I try to get through each day, but my heart is dead like Truman's." Meanwhile, officers at the scene noticed something odd. The driver, the one person who should have been checking in on the injured, was nowhere to be found. In the critical minutes after the crash, Carla made a series of split-second decisions, and none of them were about helping anyone other than herself, and none of them were about taking responsibility. Stumbling away from the wreckage in the early morning darkness, she left Truman and the others behind. Witnesses later described seeing a woman sprinting from the scene, looking panicked and disorientated. Police tracked her down quickly. When they caught up with her, she was sobbing, swaying on her feet and visibly intoxicated. The body cam footage from that moment would become infamous, and here it is.
Vol.2, 28, okay. I'm arresting you on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving, okay, and causing serious injury by dangerous driving, okay. You don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence, you're not mentioned. When questioned, anything you do say may be given a rely on the court, okay, do you understand? Do you understand that?
A breathalyzer confirmed what officers already suspected, that Carla was nearly twice the legal drink-drive limit. And yet, even as the reality began to sit in, Carla focused on herself. She focused on her own fear, her own fate, and not on Truman, nor on the family who would be forever broken by her actions. And worse still, this would not be the end of Carla's recklessness. While awaiting trial for causing death by dangerous driving, she was caught once again, pulled over for speeding. She tested positive for smoking a mild substance. Even facing the weight of a young man's demise on her conscience, Carla still continued to show the same disregard for the law and for life. In early 2024, Carla Dodds finally stood trial at Newcastle Crown Court, but she denied causing death by dangerous driving. However, would the jury agree? Throughout the trial, Carla's behaviour drew scrutiny. When she took the stand, Judge Roger Thomas Casey noted that her testimony was filled with self-pity, not with genuine remorse. She left the scene and ran away to do her best to get away with it, the judge remarked. Everything about this case shows self-pity rather than true remorse. The courtroom heard devastating victim impact statements from Truman's family. His mother, Rosalind, described Truman as her sunshine, the youngest of her 3 sons, full of laughter and mischief. She spoke about his struggles with masking his autism and ADHD, and how he had been so close to finding a new sense of peace and normalcy before his life was taken away. Rosalind shared haunting memories, holding her son's clothes in his empty bedroom, waiting in vain for him to walk through the front door, dreams of a future, helping him, supporting him, all obliterated in one moment. She didn't mince her words about Carla either. She called her actions wicked and cowardly. She said forgiveness was impossible. We get a life sentence, Rosalind said. There is a huge hole in our lives that cannot be filled. Defense lawyer James Doyle tried to paint Carla in a kinder light. He described her as a warm-hearted and kindly soul, someone who deeply regretted her actions. But the judge and Truman's family saw it differently. The truth was brutal. A split-second decision had destroyed multiple lives. After just 4 days of evidence, the jury would find her guilty. This is a case of very dangerous driving, with a number of very dangerous features to it, the judge said. He described Carla as highly impaired, and also noted that she had ignored passengers' desperate pleas to slow down. On March 21, 2025, Judge Thomas sentenced Carla Dodds to 12 years in prison. She was also banned from driving for 13 years and 9 months. The sentence brought a small measure of justice, but for Truman's family, no legal result could ever erase the pain of his loss. No sentence could restore the son, the brother, and the friend that they cherished. Outside the courthouse, Sergeant Dave Roberts, the man who led the investigation, spoke plainly. A split-second decision to drive under the influence can ruin countless lives forever, and there is simply no excuse. For Rosalind, Hilton, Miles, and everyone who loved Truman, their journey of grief continues. Every day without him is another reminder of what was stolen that night.
It's not a day that goes by where we aren't expecting her to walk back through the front door. Our lives have been torn apart through this loss. No amount of time in prison can bring Megan back.
You got something in your ear?
This case exposes one man's dark secrets as he carries out a betrayal of the worst imaginable kind. Megan Newborough was a 23-year-old from Nuneaton, UK. She was part of a really tight-knit family and had a close group of friends. One friend described her as a 1 in a million person. She always had a smile on her face and found a positive in people. She worked in the HR department at Ibstock Brick, a company who, funnily enough, manufactured manufactured bricks. It wasn't the most exciting job in the world, but she got on well with her colleagues and enjoyed going to work every day. She was doing really well at work, she was well liked, and she was looking at a promotion. She was just about to get a house and she had everything to look forward to. Her mum would describe her as a magnet. Everyone was drawn to her. This included her colleagues. In fact, she had just started seeing someone who worked in the lab at Ibstock Brick. Everything was falling into place for Megan. On Friday the 6th of August 2021, Megan had set off from her parents' home in Nuneaton. It was around 7:30 p.m, but it was still light outside. It was the middle of summer and she was making the most of it. The summer before was filled with unprecedented lockdowns, but this year was different. She was living her life to the fullest. She jumped in her car, a white Citroen C3. Her departure was caught on her family's Ring doorbell as she drove off. She had told her family she was off to meet a friend from work for a walk and would be home before dark. This was kind of true. Yes, she was off to meet a friend from work, but it wasn't for a walk. The two had been seeing each other for 6 weeks or so, and he had the house to himself for the evening. He didn't live far, and they had been getting on like a house on fire. Megan was excited, and so was he. As she said goodbye to her family, no one anticipated it would be for the final time. By the next morning, Megan hadn't returned home. Her family was starting to worry. This wasn't like her. Not at all. She wouldn't stay out all night, at least not without calling first. Something about this didn't feel right. Her parents reported her missing to Warwickshire Police at 12 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday the 7th of August. They told the police the last they knew was that she'd gone for a walk with a man from work called Ross McCullum. Ross was a 30-year-old laboratory assistant who was living with his parents on Windsor Close in Colville. Windsor Close is a quiet street, a nice street. Nothing untoward happens on Windsor Close. A few hours later, the police arrived at Ross McCullum's parents' house. They were looking for Megan or any information on her whereabouts, but they came up short. There was no sign of Megan, or for that matter of Ross. Ross wasn't home. Instead, he was in Loughborough, but his dad helped the police to get him on the phone.
Hi, is that Ross?
Hi, it is Ross, yeah.
Hi Ross, my name's Mia, I'm a police officer with Warwickshire Police. Hello. We've just come to your mum and dad's house. We're just looking for Megan, she's been reported missing. Have you seen her at all?
She came on Friday, I've been trying to call her loads.
Have you?
She came on Friday for about an hour.
Yeah.
Then she left about 9ish.
Okay.
I went to McDonald's.
Yeah.
And then she said she could call or a text when she got home. She never did.
She never did. Okay. So you haven't seen her since yesterday about, was it 9:30 you said?
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock. Okay. And where are you at the moment?
I'm in Loughborough right now.
You're in Loughborough. Okay. What are you up to in Loughborough?
Sorry?
What are you up to in Loughborough?
I'm just having a few drinks in Loughborough.
Oh yeah. Okay. No worries. Whereabouts are you?
You know where the Griffin is?
I'm a Warwickshire officer, so I have no idea whereabouts anything is, but I can sure find it. Is it the Griffin, is it?
It's right next to Sainsbury's.
Loughborough. Okay. Near Sainsbury's. Do you know the road name or anything like that?
I don't, if I'm honest with you. I'm walking down there now as we speak.
Yeah. Okay. Are you in a relationship, you and Megan?
Yeah, we've been seeing each other. She's HR at work. I work with her.
Yeah.
We've been seeing each other for about a month, and supposed to go out of the house this weekend.
Yeah.
Her mum and dad are out. Her mum and dad are out the house. I'm supposed to be going around, but she never turned up today. I'm supposed to meet me at like 12 o'clock.
Right. And did she say anything of where she might be going or where she might be?
All she said was she was going to go to. She's like going to McDonald's on the way home to get like a vanilla milkshake.
Yeah.
That's it.
And she didn't say where she'd be going today. All she said is that she'd meet you.
Well, no, she said she couldn't stop mine. She was going to stop last night around mine, but she said she couldn't.
What? How come she didn't stop? Just being nosy.
Sorry?
Bear with me 1 second, sorry, my sergeant's just ringing. Go ahead, Sarge. Will do, no worries. I'm just speaking to Ross on the phone at the moment. I'll give you an update shortly. Yep, already done. Sorry, Ross. It's just my sergeant ringing me. So she said that she couldn't stop last night. Did she say why she couldn't stop?
No, well, when I texted her to say if she wanted to, she said she couldn't. She never went into detail, no.
She just said she couldn't stop, and then she came round after that.
I think it's because her mum and dad didn't know that I was going to be coming round.
Okay.
And I don't think she wanted them to know.
Okay.
Have you not heard anything from her at all?
Nothing at all.
I've sent her about, it sounds really creepy, I've sent her about 15 WhatsApp messages. She said she was going to call me when she got home or text me or something. I've sent her loads of WhatsApps and I've rang her up loads.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're obviously worried about her.
Yeah. No, she's honestly, she's lovely, she is. I work with her, she's HR, she's a really nice person.
Yeah.
But I am really worried.
Have you known her for a long time?
I've known her for a couple of years. Then we started seeing each other. So I'd say more like 3 months ago.
Yeah.
3 months ago we really started seeing each other.
Yeah.
But then when we started, it was going to come quite. Well, she bought a house in Iceberg, and it was going to be a bit more serious. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. So, do you know if she? I mean, I know you say you've gone to Loughborough. Does she know anybody in Loughborough?
Not that I'm aware of. Maybe, I don't know. She's got loads of friends. I don't know.
Not that you're aware of. Okay. Okie dokie. And what vehicle do you drive, Ross?
Sorry?
What vehicle do you drive?
My company?
What car do you drive?
I don't drive.
You don't drive? Okay.
No, I don't have to drive.
Oh, bless you. Okay. Okie dokie. I mean, I appreciate I've probably ruined your night out now by worrying you.
No, honestly, I was worried anyway. I wasn't really on a proper night out, I wasn't.
No.
I just wanted to get out. I was really worried earlier. I was probably Dad.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not like her to do it. It's really, I don't know if you've spoken to the family. It's not like her to do this.
No, they're really worried about her as well.
Yeah.
So, okay. Are you planning on coming home soon?
I'll be home tonight. I can go. I'm at Sainsbury's now.
You're at Sainsbury's now? Okay.
In Loughborough.
Okay. Alright then. If you wouldn't mind, I've just got some other bits to do. I need to speak to my control room and stuff like that. Are you planning on staying there for a bit then, are you?
I can come back whenever you want me to. I can get a taxi or my dad can bring me home.
Yeah, okay. Let me give you a ring in 5 minutes. I just need to sort some details out and stuff, and I'll give you a ring back if that's okay, Ross.
Okay, thank you very much.
Alright, no worries. I'll speak to you shortly.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, bye.
Ross's recollection of the evening that he gave the police was very precise, some would say overly detailed. With Ross's information, the police began to pursue a number of different leads. Whilst they did this, Megan's family were doing some tracking all of their own. Using an app, they were able to trace Megan's current phone location and wasted no time in going to find their little girl. In the moment, this must have brought some relief. However, the relief quickly turned to dread as they retrieved her phone. Megan's phone was pinging on Hermitage Road in Whittick. It was deep inside a large overgrown hedge surrounded by brambles at the side of the field. Megan was, in this way, a typical 23-year-old girl. Leaving her phone anywhere, let alone abandoned in a hedge, was just out of the question. Something sinister must have happened. Less than 13 hours after she was reported missing, the police made an arrest. At 11:35 p.m. on the 7th of August, Ross McCullum was arrested on suspicion of kidnap. This is real police body cam footage from that arrest.
I'm DC Gallagher from Warwickshire Police. At this moment in time, we have reason to suspect your involvement in the disappearance of Megan Newbury. and as a result I'm arresting you on suspicion of kidnap. So you do not have to say anything. You may have a defence if you don't mention one question, something which you may later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. So I'm just going to put some handcuffs on you, alright? You can. I'll put these on first. Yeah, that's fine, no worries. Can you feel that, yeah? Yeah. We've got a bit of room in it. Okay. In relation to Megan, can you tell us where she is? You got something in your ear? What is it? Okay. Ross, in relation to Megan, can you tell us where she is? Say again. Talk down the police station. Can you tell us here, just quietly? Woodhouse Eaves. What is that?
It's near Loughborough.
Near Loughborough. What is it though? What kind of location is it?
It's on Charlie Road.
Charlie Road. Whereabouts? In the lay-by. Okay.
It's not calling this tomorrow morning.
Is she alive? No? Okay. Right, do you want to come with us? Yeah.
Police officers were immediately dispatched to the area. Sadly, they found Megan in a remote area underneath an overgrown hedgerow, treated with as much respect as her mobile phone. Ross McCullum was further arrested on suspicion of murder. The officers found Megan's abandoned car at around 2 AM on Sunday the 8th of August. Megan's blood was found on the passenger side of the car and on the outside. Nearby they found her blood-stained car keys. The car was the last piece of the puzzle. On the 10th of August 2021, Ross McCullum was charged with Megan Newborough's murder. He confessed immediately. He filled in the blanks for the police. Megan had met Ross at his parents' house, but something had gone wrong and he flew into a rage. He strangled her but then panicked. Unsure whether or not she had passed away, he used a sharp implement to cut her throat. He used sheets and fancy dress clothes to mop up the blood. He grabbed a change of clothes from the end of the banister and at around 9 PM he put Megan in her own car. He didn't have a license, but he also felt like he didn't have any other options. He drove her car and her body to nearby locations. He dumped Megan partially clothed over a wall on Charlie Road. He then threw her phone into a hedge off Hermitage Road and then abandoned her car outside a fitness centre in Loughborough College car park shortly before 10 PM. In this car park, he also dumped his blood-stained clothes and the clothes he'd used to clean up the scene in a skip. This is the real CCTV footage that you're seeing. He then got a taxi home, but he asked the driver to drop him off some distance away from his house. He got in the door at around 10:45 PM. They had the timeline, but they didn't have the motive. The real question here was why. Why had Ross ended the girl that he was seeing? What had gone so terribly wrong on that night? Ross said that it was due to childhood trauma. He tried to plead guilty to manslaughter using a defense of temporary loss of control. For this, there needs to be a qualifying trigger, some kind of event that was sufficient enough to cause him to lose control of his actions, of his mind. Ross said that Megan was talking to him about the future. He felt uncomfortable and told her to shut the up. She slapped him playfully on the side of the leg. Then, in a way of coming onto him, she pulled him closer and said, "Come here." This "come here" was enough. He claimed to trigger memories of events that had happened in his childhood, and this sent him into a blind rage. At that point, he attacked her first with his hands and then with a sharp implement. He was scared that she might wake up and then tell people what he had done. However, these reasons weren't enough. His plea offer wasn't weren't accepted. The Crown Prosecution Service, or CPS, argued that it didn't qualify as a trigger. While the defense had a doctor to back up Ross's claims that he had lost control due to his PTSD, there were questions raised about when this PTSD episode would have stopped. If he lost control when he first attacked her, had he regained it when he decided to get the sharp implement? There were too many questions. The case would go to trial. In November 2022, the case began. The prosecution presented their evidence. Megan had arrived at Ross McCullum's home for a nice evening with the man that she was seeing, but within 40 minutes of arriving at the address, she was no longer breathing. The autopsy concluded that pressure to the neck was the cause of her untimely end. However, he also ran a sharp implement across her neck, not something that could be explained as any kind of accident. If that wasn't intent, I don't know what is. The prosecution argued that each of his actions were calculated decisions and that he was fully aware of what he was doing. Cell tower data from the day after Megan disappeared showed that he had retraced his steps from the night before. Maybe he was checking for evidence, or maybe he was reliving the moment. It also showed that as he retraced his steps, he passed within 100 yards of Megan's brother, dad, and other family members, all while they were out looking for Megan's phone. The prosecution had a theory. It was pointed out in court that Ross and Megan had met up the previous weekend at a woodland for an intimate encounter, but it hadn't gone to plan. Shortly after, Ross ordered some special pills online. These pills are typically used to treat male performance issues. I'm sure you can piece together what happened in the woods for yourself. The prosecution suggested that Ross attacked her in a blind rage because he had been humiliated. Ross replied that whereas he did feel humiliated when they were in the woods, he didn't strangle her there. He was adamant he would never do something that awful just because he was humiliated. The prosecution pressed on. Did it turn you on when you had your hands around her neck? You were trying to take her head off, weren't you? You were trying to dismember her body. Ross denied the accusations, but the prosecution kept on. Not helping his case, while he was on remand, a prison warden heard him joking with other inmates, saying that if he had gone a bit further, he'd have taken her head off. He also bragged to a cellmate about using the sharp implement and suggested he would use his mental health as a tool at trial. Thankfully, all of this was used against him. With his confession, no other suspects, and his statements whilst in custody, the case was practically open and shut. The final nail in the coffin was his own mobile phone. Having gone through his WhatsApp conversations with Megan, the police discovered that their conversations quickly changed from largely innocent to overwhelmingly and extremely intimate in nature. There became a point where the tone of Ross's messaging became increasingly distorted and unpleasant kinks emerged. He demanded that Megan addressed him as Lord Commander in fantasized scenarios. I'm sorry guys, but that really made me laugh and I had to do a few takes of that line. Lord Commander. That's ridiculous. Back to the case. The rest of Ross's phone history is just as damning. Not only does it show what was going through his mind, but also the level of deceit. When Ross got home from disposing of Megan's body and belongings after 10 PM, he sent her a text. Did you get back okay, baby? At 11:18 PM, a few hours after he'd ended Megan, he googled how to tell a girl you love her. Just minutes later, he left her a voicemail in which he said, "You haven't rang back or text me or anything, it's probably nothing. You fell asleep. I had a fun time earlier. I'm guessing you've gone to bed or your phone has died. I'll talk to you in the morning and then we can go around yours." In the next hour and a half, he browsed various YouTube channels and websites. He looked up the weather forecast. He asked what club soda is. He googled the serial killer and kidnapper Levi Belfield, and then at 6:30 AM the next morning he was back online. Again, he looked for more details on Levi Belfield, then the news, and then it was on to more adult websites. He texted Megan's phone saying, "Morning baby," and a few hours later he phoned her, pretending to be concerned. Then he went back to researching serial killers. Ian Huntley, Harold Shipman, At some point, he searched up Category A prisoners. Who cuts your hair in prison? How do you pay? His mental state was clear, guilty, worried, and already accepting that jail was inevitable. The prosecution asked Ross about him looking at adult websites after ending Megan, to which Ross laughed. "I'm being completely honest, I know how bad it makes me look." He went on to explain that he was using adult material as escapism for what he'd just done. But for him, there was no escaping of what was to come. The prosecutor asked Ross if he thought the cover-up messages were worse than the murder. In short, Ross said yes. He wasn't in control of the murder, but he was in control of the cover-up. The defense, however, tried to paint a very different picture to that of the prosecution. On the 8th day of the trial, they brought up his childhood trauma. Ross was allegedly by Stephen Beedman, a man who violated and then ended Measham's schoolgirl Kaylee Hayward in 2015. A witness who Ross had confided in was called to testify. Speaking to the jury, he said, "I asked him at one point if he knew the individual who had raped him. He said there were 3 of them. 1 had ran away, but 2 remained." But for the court, the trauma story wasn't enough. On Monday the 12th of December at Leicester Crown Court, following a trial spanning 6 weeks, he was unanimously convicted of murder. He has never given a full explanation of why he ended Megan, or at least not one that really makes sense.
Megan's brother, John, spoke outside court after the sentencing.
It's difficult for me to put into words how it felt when it became apparent Megan was missing. We found her phone, or when we were told her body had been recovered. It's a feeling I wouldn't wish upon anyone. There's not a day that goes by where we aren't expecting her to walk back through the front door. We're a very close family, of which Megan was the glue that held us together. Our lives have been torn apart through this loss. I know how difficult it's been for my parents and sister to sit at court every day, listening to the web of lies spun by someone Megan not only knew, but whom she trusted, someone who clearly had no love for her at all. We're the ones now serving a life sentence. No amount of time in prison can bring Megan back. We have to carry on with our lives as best as we can, but Megan will never leave our thoughts. Meg was an exceptional person through and through. She was and is loved by all who knew her, and was nothing but pleasant to those she came into contact with. She had a whole life ahead of her. She was about to buy her first home and was excited for everything she had coming up. She was so eager to start the rest of her life, she ended up losing the one she was living.
On Friday the 16th of December, Ross was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 23 years. No sentence will bring Megan back, but her family can go to bed at night knowing that the sadistic killer is, for now, behind bars. It was now December the 29th, well past the festive calls she usually made to her mother, sometimes more than once a day. So when officers forced entry into her Cannock bungalow, they expected to find something wrong. Maybe an illness, but not this. Maybe an illness, but not this.
Hello, my name's Detective Superintendent Tom Chisholm from Staffordshire Police. I'm here today at Bath Road in Cannock to appeal for your help following the death of a lady in one of the bungalows behind me. Police officers were called to the address at around 2 o'clock on Wednesday the 29th of December following concerns for one of the residents and a lady named Lucy Clues.
Lucy Clues had always stayed close to her family, even during the hardest chapters of her life, and there had been many. She kept in touch, she kept talking, she kept trying, but nothing could have prepared her for December the 3rd, 2021. That was the day her husband, Stephen, passed away from an overdose. Stephen was a man that she'd built a life with, and now he was gone, just like that. They'd shared a bungalow on Bath Road in West Chadsmore, Cannock. It was a modest house, but one they called home, and somewhere they could retreat from the world together. But now, in the blink of an eye, Lucy was alone. She struggled with pneumonia shortly after Stephen's passing, and this was bad enough to land her in hospital. However, she discharged herself from the facility in order to attend Stephen's funeral. Her life had been shattered in an instant. She was grieving, she was physically weak,
and she was spiritually drained. And now Christmas was coming fast. A first Christmas without Stephen. Her family, especially her mother Linda, worried about her deeply. But Lucy, now 39, had always been fiercely independent, and even in her lowest of moments, she still insisted on handling things herself. On Christmas Eve, she met someone in need, and being Lucy, she didn't want to see anyone else suffering the way that she was. The man was named Thomas Grant. He had nowhere to go, no food, and no warmth. And maybe Lucy saw something familiar in him, something broken. We can imagine that she had dreams of her Christmas with Stephen, so perhaps the festive season, and this new pain and loneliness, put a heavier weight on the day that year. She told Thomas he could stay, but just for the night. This was just an arrangement, so neither of them had to be alone. This was the sort of kindness that her family say defined her. Thomas Grant had just been released from prison. He was midway through a sentence for shoplifting. He was 28 years old, of no fixed address. So once he was released, he immediately slipped back into the lifestyle that had put him behind bars in the first place. The day he met Lucy, he was at a known trap house in Hedensford, and so was she. Both were grieving in their own ways, both addicts, both desperate. According to witnesses, Thomas told Lucy that he'd just gotten out of prison and he had nowhere to go. She shared that she was still recovering from pneumonia and still reeling from the funeral that she just attended only 3 days earlier. She admitted that she needed help to get through the festive period. It seems that substances got her part of the way there, but she needed some company too. Lucy, Thomas, and others present in the trap house scraped together enough money to travel to Hampstead in Birmingham. The goal was to buy £250 worth of illicit substances, and they were going to buy it from a dealer known only as Sonny. At that point, Lucy had every reason to keep her guard up, but grief has a way of clouding judgment. Knowing that Thomas had nowhere to go, and that they now had substances to use, she did what felt right at the time, and she invited Thomas back to her home. The bungalow on Bath Road wasn't fancy, but it was warm, and it did have privacy. Plus, it was infinitely better than a Christmas on the streets, and it was quiet enough that what happened there next would go completely unnoticed by anyone on the outside. What happened next was a picture of instantly escalating chaos. Thomas moved himself into her space and quickly made himself at home. He spread out his personal belongings, he used Lucy's phone, and behind the scenes he was already plotting. What Lucy didn't know was that Thomas Grant had no intention of moving on. She gave him shelter, but he only saw an opportunity. And within 24 hours of stepping through her front door, he would betray her in the most savage and brutal way. The morning of Christmas Day began quietly at Lucy's house. Her sister-in-law dropped by with lunch. Lucy was pale, moving slowly, and still clearly unwell from pneumonia, but she was at least up and talking. Thomas Grant was there too, inside the house, seated, comfortable and warm, and now he would be fed. There should have been comfort in the knowledge that this man was going to help look after Lucy as she recovered. However, as the sister-in-law left, this would be the last time that anyone saw Lucy alive. Later that day, all hell broke loose in that bungalow. And it didn't happen in a flash of rage. It happened up close, personal, sustained. A sharp kitchen implement was used to the extremes. But before that, she had been throttled face to face, eye to eye. There was also blunt force so intense, it left shattered ribs, injuries that the doctor would later describe as being worse than anything he'd seen in similar cases. And then when it was all over, when Lucy was still, Thomas didn't run, at least not right away. He remained there in her home long enough to gather items of value. Her phone, her wedding ring, and devastatingly, a necklace that had belonged to Stephen, her late husband. Somehow, amidst the carnage, Thomas still thought about his habit. He thought about what he could steal and sell, who he could then visit, and what he could get and then use. He left Lucy there, on the floor, alone again. CCTV footage shows Thomas Grant leaving Lucy's home, and this was still on Christmas Day, and in the quiet hours that followed, the world around Lucy went dark. The timeline between the morning visit from her sister-in-law and Thomas's exit later that day is still a bit of a void. Theories range from substance usage to withdrawal to resentment, panic, and simple rage. After he fled with Lucy's belongings, he went to multiple acquaintances in the days that followed, trying to sell those stolen items, pushing for more money, doing whatever it took to get his next fix. Her wedding ring was amongst the first things that he sold, and so it was gone, just days after the funeral of her husband. He got rid of Stephen's necklace next, something that Lucy had treasured and held close. Things that weren't just valuable objects, but were emotional anchors, and all of them torn away to feed Thomas's addiction. And as he wandered through Staffordshire, blending into the cold December crowds, Lucy's body remained undiscovered. Her mother Linda had been calling. She was sending text messages and trying not to panic. But when the phone stayed silent on Boxing Day, and then the day after, the fear set in. Everyone knew that something wasn't right. By the 29th of December, it had now been 4 days since anyone had seen or heard from Lucy. Linda picked up the phone and dialed 999. This was just a welfare check, she hoped, but officers would find something else entirely. Behind the door on Bath Road was a terrible stillness that no one should ever have to witness. It was a scene so violent that it stunned even veteran officers. Lucy's demise was confirmed, and Thomas Grant was nowhere to be found.
Hello, my name's Detective Superintendent Tom Chisholm from Staffordshire Police. I'm here today at Bath Road in Cannock to appeal for your help following the death of a lady in one of the bungalows behind me. Police officers were called to the address at around 2 o'clock on Wednesday the 29th of December following concerns for one of the residents and a lady named Lucy Clues. On entering the premises, the officers sadly found that Lucy was deceased and she had some injuries. As a result of this, we've launched a murder inquiry, and we really need to hear from anybody who knew Lucy or believed that they saw Lucy from any time on Christmas Eve right the way through to Wednesday the 29th of December. Any information would really help us piece together a timeline to understand where Lucy's been and who she's been associating with. You can contact us in a number of ways, either through 101, you can contact us via our website on our online portal, or alternatively you can contact us through Crime Stoppers, which is 0800 555 111. We don't have any information to suggest that anyone else is at risk in the wider community, but we would ask people to remain vigilant and report any suspicious behaviour to the police. Thank you for listening.
The man didn't vanish though, he stayed local and he stayed active. And in his mind, he probably thought that he was still ahead of the game. In the days after Lucy's end, Thomas bounced between contacts, people he'd known from prison, from the streets and from the dealing scene. Witnesses said that he didn't appear panicked, and that he wasn't trying to hide. In fact, he was now openly asking for money, telling people that he needed it urgently. To some people, he claimed that he'd come into some valuable jewellery, but he didn't mention where it came from. Once Lucy was found though, everything changed. Forensics moved quickly, and Thomas Grant's DNA was everywhere in the house. Police put out alerts, they released descriptions, they shared images from CCTV. And just 1 day after the discovery of Lucy, on December the 30th, eagle-eyed officers spotted a man outside a shop in Hedensford. He was wearing a mask, but something about him still stood out. When officers approached the man, he gave a name that wasn't his. He said he had no tattoos, that he didn't know what they were talking about. But when I asked him to roll up his sleeves, the truth started to break through. There on his arm was a clear, unmistakable tattoo, and it was one that matched up to the suspect's description. Officers placed him under arrest on suspicion of murder, and here is that shocking moment caught on police body cam.
Mate, you got any tattoos? No tattoos. Do you mind if we have a look at you?
I've got one on my arm, yeah.
Please. You're under arrest for murder.
For murder?
Murder? Stand by one.
Are you joking? Murder?
Cookie.
He knew he'd been caught. Back at the station, he remained cagey. He claimed he was innocent. He said that someone else had done it, but he refused to say who that person was. But at one point, whilst in remand, he lashed out during an exchange with officers. He broke down and admitted the truth. He said it was him, that he did it. But then, just as quickly, he changed his mind. He now said this was a lie. He said that officers had made it all up. So his stories kept on shifting, but the evidence didn't. Thomas Grant now faced a wall of evidence that he couldn't climb. CCTV showed him leaving Lucy's home on Christmas Day. Forensics tied him to the weapon. Some of his belongings were still in her house. Her precious stolen jewellery was traced through contacts that he'd visited days later, and none of this could just be ignored. During the trial, which lasted 5 weeks at Stafford Crown Court, Thomas Grant maintained his innocence. He still insisted that someone else was responsible, but he still wouldn't name that person, nor would he offer a single alternative explanation. But would the jury see through it? They heard about the brutality of the event, how Lucy had met her end, how her ribs were shattered from sheer force, and they heard about the stolen ring, the stolen necklace, and then they heard from Lucy's family. Her mother, her grandmother, the people who loved her most, were now left with only memories. On August the 8th, 2023, the jury returned a verdict. Thomas Grant was guilty of murder. 2 months later, on October the 30th, he was then sentenced to life in prison. He will serve a minimum of 25 years and 152 days. Thomas Grant refused to attend his sentencing. He gave no apology, no explanation, not even the dignity to face the people that he'd hurt.
During Grant's time on remand, he made admissions to prison officers as to what he had actually done. He later retracted these and denied ever saying those comments in the context that they were made. I'm glad the jury saw through Grant's persistent lies and found him guilty of murder. I hope this brings some comfort and peace to the family who are still grieving at this really sad time.
In court, Lucy's family sat quietly as the sentencing was read. Her mother, Linda, had only one thing to say: "I will always love Lucy. My memories of her will live on." Her grandmother, Elizabeth, simply added, "I love her and will always love her, forever and always." Detective Chief Inspector Cheryl Hanan called it an exceptionally violent attack on someone who had shown only compassion. Justice had legally been served, but for those who knew Lucy, the sorrow lingers on. She was kind, she was trusting, and she never knew that it was a monster she was letting through her door. This is the true story of Ellie Gould, a lover of animals, a driven young woman, someone with a bright future within her grasp. But when young love appeared in her life, things would start to change. An unimaginable chain of events began to unravel. So what would become of Ellie? Ellie Gould was born on the 6th of February 2002. Her family lived in the Wiltshire town of Carn, nestled in the North Wessex Downs, an area of outstanding natural beauty. It's a small community and a very close one. It was the ideal place to bring up children, and the Goulds were, to all intents and purposes, a picture-perfect family. Ellie was known for her bubbly and smiley personality. She had a passion for horse riding and animals, and had ambitions to join the mounted police. When she started 6th form at the Harden School in Chippenham, she quickly made a new set of friends. Ellie was likeable and put a lot into her friendships. The group became close quickly, and as the school year progressed, it also got bigger with more boys joining the group. They'd spend every minute that they could together, bonding over teenage things. They were just normal, happy, carefree teenagers living life to the fullest. Ellie and her friends had their whole lives ahead of them. In January 2019, Ellie's mum received the news that every parent dreads. Ellie had a boyfriend. After school one day, Ellie had told her mum that a boy had asked her out.
She was giggly and shy, almost embarrassed. "What's he called?" her mum questioned. He was Tom Griffiths, a boy from Derry Hill. He was in her friend's group at school and was a bright, talented sportsman. Ellie and Tom had an on-again, off-again thing in lower school, but they made it official when they entered sixth form. This, in Ellie's mum's eyes, was a surprising choice. Ellie was just about to start her exams. She didn't think she was interested in a boyfriend right now. Ellie's dad wasn't overly keen on Tom because he didn't say much, but the parents assumed this aspect of his character was just down to his age. They believed the relationship would just fizzle out, and it seemed they were right. Priorities quickly shifted for Ellie, and boyfriend Tom became a less important part of her life. She decided to focus more on revision, exams, and her girlfriends. By May, she was ready to end the relationship. It was a normal Thursday evening when she ended things. Afterwards, she texted her friends with relief that she finally felt free again. But little did anyone know, her freedom would be short-lived. On the 3rd of May 2019, it was a regular Friday morning in Wiltshire. Carol, Ellie's mum, was at work. She'd left 17-year-old Ellie eating her cereal at home when she left. Ellie would have normally been in school on a Friday morning, but she didn't have any lessons that day, so she was staying at home to revise. Her friend planned to pick her up at around 12 o'clock. She would drive both of them to school for their history class. Carol got a phone call from her husband Matt around lunchtime. This wasn't anything out of the ordinary, he often phoned for a chat. But this call was different. Father Matt was hysterical. He said, "Carrie, you need to come home. You need to come home. Ellie's had an accident. She's had an accident. Just drive carefully. Ellie's had an accident." Detective Superintendent Jim Taylor was a senior investigating officer on the case. Father Matt had returned home at around 3 o'clock. He had then walked into the kitchen and found Ellie. He thought she had had an accident and immediately sought help from a neighbour. They called the ambulance and the police, who were faced with a horrific scene. 17-year-old Ellie had passed away. She was found face down in a pool of her own vital fluids. There she lay face down with her right arm across her body, holding onto the handle of a sharp implement. To the naked eye, it looked as though she'd inflicted her wounds on herself. When you consider the nature of her injuries, the amount of blood, and Ellie's family circumstances, after all, she was incredibly loved and happy. The police believed there was no way that this injury was self-inflicted. Ellie's distraught parents believed their daughter's tragic death was just a mishap. Had she maybe put the knife in a toaster and electrocuted herself and fallen backwards? Had she fallen off the cabinet whilst holding the sharp implement? While Ellie's parents were struggling to come to terms with her passing, the police were trying to piece together their own version of the story. A neighbour had seen someone call at the address earlier in the day, and whilst they didn't see their face, they did give a description. They were male with a slim build. The search for the mystery visitor was on. It's uncommon for a homicide to occur inside someone's home. This suggests the perpetrator was likely familiar with the victim. The police began to try and connect the dots in Ellie's friend group. Who, if anyone, would want to hurt her? Ellie's friend was questioned about the day that she was supposed to pick her friend up and take her to the history class. And although she was nervous about being questioned by the police, she did her best to answer their questions. She'd received a text from Ellie shortly before she was due to pick her up. She said that she didn't need a lift anymore. The detective's questioning soon turned from Ellie to Tom, the now ex-boyfriend. The friend said, "I was screenshotting messages that Tom had sent, and then I looked on Snap Maps to see where he was. Just coincidentally, I thought I'll have a look on Snap Maps, and it so happened to be that he was still in the area." She further explained, I thought, oh gosh, Tom's gone over to convince her that they should be together. She thought that Ellie, being Ellie, will have been blunt with him and said, look Tom, it's not happening. We're not getting back together. You need to get over it. The friend also revealed that Tom had messaged everyone on the day of the murder. He sent pictures to a group chat where he shared a photo of himself with scratches on his neck. He said that he had been hurting himself, going through a tough time. His friends offered support and urged him to talk to them whenever he felt overwhelmed. For the police, Ellie's ex-boyfriend Tom wasn't just a person of interest. He was the person of interest. When officers caught up with him, he had injuries to his neck which looked fresh. He also wasn't acting normally. But then again, he was a teenager who just found out that his ex-girlfriend, whom he still loved, was dead. It didn't necessarily mean that he was guilty, but he was suspicious. Tom also matched the description that the neighbour had given. He was then deemed as a suspect and arrested. At the police station, Tom continued to deny any involvement in Ellie's death. He explained that on the day of Ellie's death, he'd been dropped off at school by his mum. He wasn't feeling well, so he then returned home. He had spoken to a neighbour about his stress, ill relatives, and about doing harm to himself, and the neighbour then took him back to school. He again became very upset and asked to speak to the school nurse. He once again explained that he was doing physical harm to himself. They then called his mother. She came to pick him up from school and then took him back home. But the evidence the police were gathering was beginning to cast doubt on Tom's version of events. When they analysed his phone, his story just wasn't adding up. At around 10:50 AM, his phone disconnected from the family router, and it didn't then reconnect until an hour later. His location services were activated on his phone, and they could see that at 10:53 AM, he arrived at Ellie's house. He didn't leave again until 11:51 AM. He'd spent almost exactly an hour inside. CCTV footage from a bus company also had dashcam footage of his silver Ford Fiesta. This wasn't enough to charge him in connection with Ellie's death, but it was enough to show that he was lying about something. After he returned home, there was an 18-minute gap where he dropped off the router again. This indicated that he'd left his home once again for a short time, a 9-minute walk away from his home address. Search teams were deployed and quickly found what they were looking for. The search teams found a black bin liner. Inside, there were blood-stained tea cloths, napkins, and towels. They also searched Tom's home address. Here they found red vital fluid on a pair of his work trainers. When sent to the laboratory, all these items came back as a DNA match for Ellie. Tom had been caught red-handed. Armed with the damning forensic evidence, police charged 17-year-old Thomas Griffiths with Ellie Gould's murder. They had carefully pieced together what had happened that day. On the 3rd of May 2019, Tom was dropped off at school by his mother. After emailing his teachers to tell them he was feeling unwell, he walked to the bus station where he caught a bus back home. His mum had also returned home briefly, forcing Tom to hide in the wardrobe of his bedroom. He didn't want her to know that he was absent from school. When his mother left, he took the keys to the family car and drove to Ellie's house. Following an argument, Tom attempted to throttle Ellie. He then used a sharp implement he had taken from the family kitchen and jabbed her in the neck 13 times. Tom had spent an hour at the house attempting to clean up the crime scene. He washed his trainers in the kitchen sink and cleaned the knife using an apron, before then placing it in Ellie's hand. He used her finger to unlock her phone, posing as her. He then sent a text message to her friend telling her not to pick her up. He went home to change, put his clothes in the washing machine, and then dumped the bag of evidence in a local woodland. A neighbour saw him returning from the woodlands and drove him back to the school. There he was collected by his mum after speaking to the nurse. During his hearing in August, Tom pleaded guilty to Ellie's murder. However, in his defense case statement, he gave a new version of events for the day that she passed. Tom said that he drove the car to Ellie's house and they intended to study. After studying for a while, they began to argue about family members, and at that point, Tom claimed to have suffered from amnesia. He said he remembered throttling Ellie, but he then lost his memory. Ellie. He came to, but Ellie was lying next to him in a pool of her own blood. This story seemed unlikely. Blind rage can lead to forgetting, but in this case, Tom had used Ellie's fingerprint to send a final text message. This wasn't blind rage, and it certainly wasn't amnesia. It was an excuse for a cold and calculated plan. Tom pleaded guilty to Ellie's murder, meaning that the case would not go to trial. On the 8th of November 2019 at the Bristol Crown Court, Ellie's family came face to face with the boy who had gone from boyfriend to killer. He kept his head down and wouldn't look up at anyone. And although he was within weeks of being an adult, he was sentenced as a child because he had no previous convictions. He was sentenced to life, but with a tariff of just 12.5 years. A lenient sentence that devastated Ellie's family, friends, and the community. This is the true story of Zara Alina. She believed that no woman should have to worry about walking home alone, and she led by example. But on one such walk after a night out, she would cross paths with the antithesis of everything that she was and what she stood for. What would become of Zara? Zara Natasha Alina was her mother's only child. Growing up, she loved ballet, tap dancing, and skating. Even as a child, she was an extrovert. She could talk for hours, but she was a great listener too. Zara, or Zash to her close friends, knew what she wanted in life from the age of just 5. Zara was going to be a lawyer. When she put her mind to something, nothing would stop her. Zara worked hard to earn a law degree from the University of Westminster. She was strong and independent, and by the time she was 35 years old, she was a trainee solicitor who had just started at the Royal Courts of Justice. Her dreams were all coming true. She told her friend that she was as happy as she'd ever been, and that she could now start thinking of her future and starting a family of her own. Things were falling into a perfect place. On the 25th of June 2022, Zara met a friend for a catch-up. They met at a local pub, the Great Spoon of Ilford. There they had dinner and a drink before moving on to a bar. Here, Zara only drank water, but the two were just enjoying each other's company. At around 2 AM, they called it a night. The friend got in a cab, but Zara decided to walk. She was close to home and it was a warm evening. Ilford is a bustling, diverse area in East London. Zara began to head home along Cranbrook Road, a well-lit residential street just 10 minutes walk from her house. Here she arrived at the junction of Cranbrook Road at the same time as a man, in what would be described as a fatal coincidence. The man had also been in the Great Spoon of Ilford earlier in the evening, but he was kicked out after harassing a female bartender. He staggered around the streets of Ilford, following different women. This is the real CCTV of his actions. One woman, noticing he was trailing her, dived into a supermarket to hide. He marched up and down the aisles looking for her before waiting outside. Later, he went into a chicken shop, staring at a female customer. He had his hands down his trousers, and he then followed her too. But she luckily managed to lose him. He then followed a third woman along the street. When she noticed him, he overtook her, pretending to enter a house. But in fact, he was just hiding in a driveway, lying in wait. Fortunately, the woman went into her own house before she reached him. Wandering back to Cranbrook Road, the man spotted a fourth woman. This was Zara Alina. He crossed the road to begin walking closely behind her. He followed her for a while along the well-lit road. He was caught on camera several more times before he took his opportunity to grab her. He pounced on Zara from behind, placing one arm around her neck and a hand over her mouth. She was now just minutes from home. The fact that Cranbrook Road was a busy road, it had traffic flow and residential houses, as well as CCTV cameras. This didn't deter the man. He dragged Zara to the ground and into the dark shadows of a driveway. She fought back so hard that she was able to stand back up, but he struck her again repeatedly until she fell unconscious. He removed some of her clothing before forcing himself on her. He then kicked and stamped on Zara. CCTV, which captured the full attack, showed him walking away from the scene twice, but returning to viciously stamp on her once again. He used a fence post for balance to maximize the power of his blows. The attack lasted 9 minutes. He then stole her purse, keys, phone, leggings, and underwear. What he didn't want to keep was just strewn on the pavement nearby. Zara lay alone for 20 minutes before she was discovered by 2 passing couples. She was terribly injured and struggling to breathe. Paramedics were called at 2:44 a.m. and for over an hour they desperately tried to save her life on that driveway. She was then taken to the Royal London Hospital. Surgeons fought tirelessly throughout the morning, but tragically, her injuries were just too great. Zara Alina's life officially ended at 9:58 a.m. A post-mortem examination revealed that Zara had suffered 46 separate injuries in a 9-minute attack. Severe blunt force trauma to her head, deep lacerations to the scalp, bruising to the lips, eyes, nose and jaw, as well as to intimate areas. Her cause of death was traumatic brain injury and prolonged pressure to the neck. The brutality of the attack is almost impossible to imagine, but it was this brutality that caused Zara's killer to leave crucial evidence. 2 fingerprints were left on the fence post he had used to balance himself whilst he attacked. However, both prints were only partial, and neither of them were sufficient enough to generate a match from the millions of prints in the fingerprint database. But the police wasted no time. They collected CCTV footage and very quickly worked their way backwards from the attack, piecing together the suspect's movements in the lead-up. Investigators noticed something significant. He was wearing what they described as a prison-issue vest. This was someone who had been in trouble with the law previously and perhaps recently. An image was circulated around local police stations, and one vigilant officer recognized the man from a previous arrest. He was able to provide a name, and therefore the partial prints were compared to the ones they had on file for this potential suspect, and it was a positive match. The man's name was Jordan McSweeney. But it wasn't just CCTV of his movements before the crime that they gathered. They watched him walk back down Cranbrook Road after the attack, before making his escape by climbing a wall into nearby Valentine's Park. There he entered a fairground and made his way to a set of caravans towards the back. Valentine's Park skirts Cranbrook Road, and at the time there was a carnival or travelling fairground on it. Police made their way there and passed around the picture. The staff recognised McSweeney immediately and pointed towards a caravan. He's in that caravan, there, asleep, they told the police.
Jordan McSweeney?
That's on, yeah.
Can you stand up for us, mate?
Just tell him.
You're under arrest for rape and murder of a female at Cranbrook Road.
Right?
Okay.
I've got it. Yep. Come forward.
Just going to search you now, alright?
Less than 72 hours after Zara drew her final breath, McSweeney was arrested on the 29th of June. Jordan was 29 years old and a career criminal. He had 28 convictions for 69 previous offences: burglary, assaults on police and members of the public, driving offences, shoplifting, criminal damage, racially aggravated harassment, possession of a weapon, theft of a vehicle. A long and varied career. As a child, he took part in bare-knuckle fights for cash, and he was expelled from 2 schools, one for selling illicit substances to other kids. Much of his childhood was spent in and out of youth offender institutes, and this trend continued into adulthood. Prior to Zara's attack, he had served 9 separate prison sentences. Even in prison, he managed to notch up over 100 separate incidents: violence, threatening guards, misogynistic behaviour towards female staff members. He even started a fire in prison and took part in a riot. This riot saw one guard requiring emergency treatment for a wound to the head made by a sharp implement. And unsurprisingly, McSweeney also had a history of domestic maltreatment. He had a restraining order placed on him by one ex-partner, and a ferocious attack on another almost left her blinded in one eye, resulting from a kick to the face. Following his arrest, McSweeney was interviewed by police 3 times. Knowing how to play the system, he refused to answer any questions. He wouldn't even provide his name or information on where he lived. The only time he spoke was to make threats. He told one officer he was going to bite his face off. He showed nothing but disrespect for the situation that he'd found himself in, right up until the point he was formally charged with Zara's murder. He didn't deny that the CCTV images were of him, and he didn't show a shred of remorse. In fact, at one point, he yawned loudly and complained he was bored. His crime had been opportunistic, and he knew it. He should have been in prison on the night of Zara's murder. Jordan McSweeney had only been released from prison 9 days earlier. He'd served part of a sentence for robbery before he was released on license. This was on the condition that he attended regular meetings with his probation officers. Released on June the 17th, he missed an appointment that very same day, and then another on June the 20th. The police weren't informed to arrest him for another 4 days on June the 24th. Police went to the address that they had on record for him, his mother's house. This was on June the 25th. But he wasn't there. This was the morning before the murder. An internal review later revealed that a series of errors and miscommunication meant that, despite his long history of violence, he'd been incorrectly labelled as a medium risk to society. He had no tag, and there was what has been described as no clarity whatsoever on where he'd been living. The evidence against McSweeney was overwhelming. Already the CCTV footage and the fingerprints placed him at the scene. But there was more. Police obtained footage from the fairground. This was captured the afternoon following the attack. McSweeney is seen wearing the same prison-issue vest and carrying a bag. He reappears just minutes later, shirtless and bagless. The bag was found hidden beneath the skirting of another caravan inside the park. Inside was the vest and his shoes, covered in Zara's DNA. He initially tried to blame all the DNA evidence on having been bitten by a dog. The weight of all this evidence against him gave him no alternative but to lie. McSweeney then pleaded guilty on all charges on November the 16th. Despite this, he still wasn't ready to face up to what he had done. When it came to his sentencing on December the 14th, he refused to leave his cell. The court saw this act as one final act of sheer disregard for Zara's life. At sentencing, the judge said, after satisfying his lust, he proceeded to destroy the woman he had just degraded. With sickening deliberation, he stamped on her. The defendant had the physical advantages of strength and surprise. In everything else, she was better than him. She was talented, spirited, intelligent, and kind. The defendant is a pugnacious and deeply violent man, with a propensity for violence. I have no doubt Jordan McSweeney intended to kill Zara Alina. The nature of his attack, stomping on her head, and the fact he returned twice drives me to the conclusion that this was a determined intention to kill. Jordan McSweeney was sentenced to life imprisonment. He will serve 38 years as the minimum term. Given his previous track record in prison, it's likely he will never see freedom again.